Good evening, dear friends, and thank you for joining us. This is part number 3 in our seminar on the spheres of Dante. And today, as we continue going down into the spheres of hell for this particular seminar, we're going to be covering the spheres of Venus and the Sun. Now, let's keep in mind, each one of these particular spheres of hell is the shadow of one of the particular planets. And we have already covered the sphere of the moon as the vestibule, and we have already seen the sphere of Mercury as that sphere in which all those who have committed the crime of fornication end up expiating. So we go one sphere deeper into the realm of Venus. And Venus, ruled by Archangel Uriel, is certainly the soul, the archetype that influences everything that has to do with love and affinity. That means that what we will find in that sphere of Venus is the complete opposite. It is the actual shadow of those attributes and virtues of Archangel Uriel. So again, as we look at these different spheres of hell, there is an upper hell and there is a lower hell. As we walked with Dante and Virgil, we walked past the vestibule of the indecisive, of those who have not yet defined themselves, and we crossed the river Charon, and we walked into the first circle, which is limbo. That limbo is the sphere of the moon. It is there where we see all those souls that are expiating because they never received the sacrament of baptism. And here, at this level of studies, we have already learned that when it comes to the sacrament of baptism, that means that they never made a pact of waters. That means that they never received the arcanum. And if they received it, they did not follow it. Immediately afterwards, we went into the sphere of the lustful. That is the sphere of Mercury. And at that moment in time, we stopped our journey. So let's go ahead and bring this to a brief pause. And let's go back outside of the spheres of hell and look at the great aspect of all creation. And as we look at the writings in the Popol Vuh, which is the sacred writing of the Maya, it tells us Master Giant Lightning is the first, Newborn Lightning, the second, Splendor of Lightning, the third. These are the three spirits of heaven. And with them gathered the dominators, the powers of heaven. Earth, they said, and immediately it was born. Only like a fog, like a cloud, was the birth of matter. When the Maya, in their sacred teachings, when they speak about Master, Giant Lightning, Newborn Lightning, and Splendor of Lightning, they're speaking of Brahma, they're speaking of Vishnu and Shiva. These are the very same Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But notice that they say, and with them gathered the dominators. These are dominions, thrones, powers, cherubs, seraphim, cherubim. So with them gathered those dominions, those dominators, and the powers of heaven. In our very own Christian Bible, we find the very same writing. It is just that the Bible that we have today is a translation from the Hebraic Bible, and the words Elohim have been translated insufficiently. Let's remember that El in Hebrew means God, Eloah means goddess, and Elohim means gods and goddesses. So for all purposes, when it says in the beginning, Elohim God, that means the gods and the goddesses created heaven and earth. These are the very same three manifestations, three spirits of heaven. These are the very same manifestations of those divine spirits, those powers, and those dominions. These very same heavens are the states of consciousness. And when it says earth, it is speaking as well about the micro cosmic man. And the book of Moses, it continues by saying, and the earth was without form and it was void. Just exactly as in the Popol Vuh, we can see that it says something very similar. It was formed only like a fog, like a cloud, was the birth of matter. So we need to understand this so that we can get a feel for what is actually happening as we descend into these spheres of hell. Because what we see is that there is a divine manifestation that enables the release of that ray of creation, with the arrival of the Mahamambantara, which is the cosmic day. And as those monads emerge and they go in waves for a particular purpose. And that is, they have to be able to experience creation. It is said that at the moment of the birth of the cosmic day, at the moment of the aurora of the Mahamambantara, as those monads drifted away from the bosom of the Father, they cried and they suffered terribly. And of course, we know that they were not literally, we can say that they were not literally crying. But what we can get from that is that they are going from a realm of absolute liberty, absolute perfect manifestation, and they're descending into subsequent realms of creation that each one of them has more and more laws. Remember that from the very cusp of the tree of life, when we have the realm of Asilut, what we see there is the realm of the archetypes. It is here in this realm we see the manifestation of all the gods and all the goddesses. Everything exists in potentiality. And immediately below that, as you observe that tree of life on the screen, what we have is the realm of creation. That is Bria. And the first creation that emanates from the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is El. And El is our innermost. El is your divine Father. It is your Father who is in secret. That realm of Bria, that realm of creation, that is within the sixth dimension of nature. That is the macrocosmos. And immediately underneath, we come into a third triangle. That is a triangle of magic. This is the realm of formation. It is known as Yetzirah. And here is where we have the mental realm, the astral realm, and the ethereal realm. And then at the very bottom, we have the plane of substance. That is Asya. That is the philosophical earth. So as the ray of creation descends from the realm of the archetypes into the realm of creation, and our fathers are born at the likeness and image of our real being, which is our Glorian, the Father, we see that as they continue descend, as the ray of creation continues descending, our fathers project a part of themselves that is a fraction of our human soul. The human soul is in the sphere of Tiferet. That sphere right there that we see in gold. That sphere of Tiferet. Tiferet means beauty. And it is from that causal plane, from that causal realm of consciousness, that a spark emanates out of our Father. There is that spark that comes out of the human soul of our innermost is our consciousness. And this consciousness is the one thing that we have incarnated from our Father. Our consciousness is in the very same likeness of our Father. It has all of the attributes and powers and faculties and virtues of our Father. The thing is, as you have heard us say before, that just like a spark that escapes a bonfire has the same attributes of the fire itself, it is infinitely different. There are infinite degrees of difference between that spark and the fire itself. And the same thing happens with the manifestation of our innermost and our own consciousness. As that consciousness is projected, it descends into the realm of the mind, into the realm of the emotions, which is the astral plane, and it comes into the ethereal plane, which is the realm of vitality, and then it lands in this realm of substance in Asia. And our being does that because there is something that is known as the parlog duty of the being. The parlog duty is the yearning of manifestation of the being. The being projects its consciousness so that it can experience the greatness and the wonder of creation. And the being seeks to work the consciousness. Some beings work the consciousness at a very consistent pace. And you can see people who find the wisdom of Gnosis and they hold on to that teaching and they apply that teaching directly into their lives, life after life, and as much as necessary. And they reach a level of mastery and continue moving on in their vertical path. There are others who choose to take a different approach. And thus there are other beings that will work their consciousness intermittently. And sometimes the consciousness feels that yearning, that longing of the being, and it will go deep into the books and the studies and be very diligent in practices. And overnight, not anymore. And a week or 2 weeks or a month or a couple of years will go by and suddenly that yearning is awakened again. And the being then works that consciousness intermittently. But we must also say that there are beings that have no interest in working their consciousness. They have no interest at all in achieving any kind of self-realization. And thus, they release their consciousness and their consciousness experiences, but they do not work the consciousness actively. And of course, we all have the freedom of choosing, and just like us above, so below, the same thing happens with our being. So this is what is the parlog duty of the being. So we find ourselves here in this kingdom. This kingdom is the philosophical earth. And this philosophical earth is the earth. But the philosophical earth is also our body. It is also the substance. It is also our organs and our tissues and our blood and our bone structure. It is all of this together. And here we find then that we have to work together so that we can integrate that law of the Triamashikamno, that law of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the one that allows every creation to manifest. And thus we come together as one polarity that is positive, the man, one polarity that is negative, the woman, and we unite them with a third force, which is a force of love, a force that is 100% conciliatory. And as those two forces conciliate, the law of the Triamashikamno becomes active. And the moment that happens, through that super dynamic of love, those two beings become one. As they do that, they become able to start creating the superior existential bodies. They both become able to awaken their igneous serpent of magical powers, to eliminate their defects through the intervention of their Divine Mother, to start incarnating the virtues, attributes, powers, values, virtues, all of these things that make up the solar soul. And that has to happen at this level. But notice that this particular kingdom, this sphere of Malkut, or what is known again as the realm of Asia, the realm of substance, is right there at the door of hell. For all purposes, we are here with one foot on earth and another foot in hell itself. So as we are here, and remembering that we're going to be covering the sphere of Venus, and Venus that has everything to do with love and affinity, we have to then go back to the Our Father prayer, because as we are here, we make a series of mistakes, even though we constantly are repeating this prayer. In some cases, every night. In other cases, only when people are afraid. But nevertheless, this is a prayer that we recite all over and over again. And yet, we tend to do so mechanically, not even paying attention to what we're saying, just saying it, hoping that something wonderful is going to happen. And in the 7 petitions that make up the Our Father prayer, there is one that says, "Give us today our daily bread." And this has everything to do with love and affinity. Because the fact is that when we are speaking about our daily bread, we're not speaking about that mixture of water and flour and some salt and yeast that you throw in the oven and it grows and eventually you slice and eat. That is not that. Speaking of our daily bread, this powerful prayer is making a reference to the things that nourish us. And we are nourished by 3 distinct sources of nourishment. The first one is the air that we breathe. The second one is the food that we eat. And the third one are the impressions that we receive at the level of the mind. Whenever we breathe, it is at the level of the lungs that the lungs translate the impression of that air, and they extract from it exactly what our body needs for its sustenance. So not only we get the oxygen that is necessary, we also extract from the air prana. And prana is that force of creation that imbibes and imbues life in everything that exists. We find prana in the minerals and in the rocks, just like we find prana in every sun, in every star, in every galaxy. The second source of food is the food that we eat. And of course, that food as well goes through a series of transformations. We start the digestive process in the mouth when we start chewing it. And as we are grinding to a pulp, that food, we start making the nutrients a lot more available so that when we swallow them, we can start absorbing them at different areas of the mouth. And as it gets into the stomach, well, the stomach then does its necessary series of activities and receives the addition of other chemicals that make the releasing of those nourishing agents a lot easier. And as it goes through the digestive tract, well, everything that has to be extracted goes into the bloodstream, and what is not needed is also rejected. So notice that there are 2 similarities here in these systems. When we are breathing, we have a means to receive the impression of the air, a means to process it and extract from it what we need and discard what we don't need. That happens at the level of the lungs. The same thing happens with the digestive tract and the food that we eat. So there is no surprise that when it comes to the mind and the impressions that we receive, that we have a similar mechanism. Because when we receive the impressions directly through the senses of the sensual mind. And just like the other digestive systems have a way to receive the nourishment, as we receive the impressions through our senses, we receive the impact of the impression in the mind itself. But something has to happen at the level of the mind. There has to be some kind of membrane, just like we have a membrane in our lungs that takes care of receiving and absorbing the oxygen from the airstream and returning carbon dioxide and a little bit of carbon monoxide and a little bit of other stuff. The same thing has to happen at the level of the mind. That semi-permeable membrane is the consciousness. When we maintain the remembrance of self, we can receive the impacts of the external impressions, we can filter them through the consciousness, and then we can extract what is useful to the mind and discard the rest. But when we are not maintaining that remembrance of self, that is the equivalent of you feeding through your mouth and sending out that pulp directly into the bloodstream without it being adequately prepared. And just as if we were to put just raw food in our blood, it will trigger a very violent reaction from our body and we would get terribly ill. The same thing happens to the mind. When we are not maintaining that remembrance of self, and when we cannot place that consciousness to operate as a filter to those impressions, we start then bringing all of that garbage into the mind, and the ego starts reacting. And part of the reactions that the ego will show when it comes to what has to do with that third sphere in hell has to do with the ability to express gratefulness and satisfaction. Because when we are grateful, we receive things, regardless of what they are, in a very positive and constructive attitude. We not only become very welcoming, but as we receive in such a way that makes it blatantly clear that we are in gratitude for the gift. But today, that is not what happens with us. Because today, when it comes to food, we are not grateful about it. We will take the food that we receive, and particularly in this nation, well, we are the nation in the world that throws away the most food, regardless if there are many other people who have nothing to eat and if they're dying. That is what we do. And when it comes to impressions, we are very selective with the impressions that we like. Because we like praise, and we like others to admire us and recognize us. But the moment that situations become a little difficult or violent or insulting around us, we immediately resent them. So you see, there is really no gratefulness. And when it comes to satisfaction, and we think about the food that we eat, well, perhaps the holidays of Thanksgiving are one of the most prominent for showing how is it that we have no gauge when it comes to our satisfaction. And in many instances, people will come together and they will sit around the table and they will eat. And they will eat beyond their needs and beyond their capacities, to the point where we have to loosen up our belts, maybe unbuckle our pants, so that we can feel more comfortable and accommodate all the overeating that we do. But the same thing happens with our impressions. If we don't show satisfaction after being grateful for those impressions, if we do not filter with the consciousness the impact of those impressions, then we miss the opportunity to extract what is truly nourishing out of the events that are happening around us. And because we're so selective that we only want the things that we like, the things that give us instantaneous gratification and pleasure, then in those we overabuse and we seek more and more of them. So as you can see, all of this synthesizes down into this defect of gluttony. And gluttony is not just associated to food. When it comes to gluttony is greed or excessive indulgence. And when it comes to these aspects of the mind, of us being grateful and showing satisfaction for what we are consuming, when we start going into the space of excessive indulgence, we can create a lot of harm to ourselves and to those who are around us. And this is what we see in all of these beautiful artistic renditions that come to us from the times of the Greek and the Romans. And here we see an orgy. And in this orgy, we see that people are overindulging in sensations. And as we see from left to right, we can see that not only they are indulging and affecting with wine, that is the wine with carrying that demon alcohol, tampering and tainting our innocence. which is our own consciousness. We can see that people are showing no gratefulness and certainly no level of satisfaction yet, and they are abusing of their senses, the senses of sight, the senses of sound, and particularly the sense of touch, to the degree that in the far right, what we see is the figure of a demon of gluttony and greed. We can see that it is not appealing at all, and we can see that it has no arms. It is just there. And behind it, we can see someone who is dead. And it's dead because they have lost all of their senses. They have literally passed out. So we can see here the effect of gluttony in our psyche. So let's go back to our good friend Dante Alighieri and Virgil as they are walking down in hell. And as they continue, Dante awakens in the third circle of hell, and this is the circle of the gluttons. There is a stinking slush that falls from the sky and collects on the ground, where naked shades howl, and they roll in the mire. They roll and bask themselves in the filth. Amongst all of these souls, we find that there is one gluttonous that is sitting up from the mire, and he is addressing Dante. This in particular is the shade of an old friend of Dante of name Psycho. And Virgil tells Dante that Psycho, just like those other shades that exist there, all of those souls, that they will remain in hell, in that muck, until the last judgment. And at that moment, the two poets look at each other, and Dante initiates a conversation about the future life. Dante questions Virgil concerning that last judgment. What is it going to happen? And Virgil tells him that although those souls will never reach perfection, they will be nearer to that perfection after that last judgment. So Dante and Virgil continue walking amongst those shades. And as they do, and as they are making the way across the swamp, they occasionally walk on the shades themselves, because these have no corporeal bodies. And Dante is profoundly shocked with the experience that he's going through. And as they go there, one of the shades that Dante comes to see is that of Petronius. Petronius is also known as the judge of elegance. And he was known as the judge of elegance back in the days of the court of Emperor Nero. Tacitus, he wrote about Petronius in his Annals, and Tacitus stated that Petronius had spent his days in sleep, and he used to spend his nights in attending to his official duties, or perhaps in his amusements. It has been said that Petronius used to live a life of vicious indulgence, and he became one of the chosen circle of Nero's inmates, actually of Nero's intimates. So notice that he was devoted to a life of pleasures. Men and women used to love him. But just like that, the moment that he was living past beyond any considerations of gratitude for what he had, or expressing satisfaction, knowing when to state when enough was enough, Petronius' high position ended up making him the object of envy of many people around him. And as a consequence, one of his enemies accused him of treason, and he was arrested. But Petronius did not wait for his sentence, and instead he chose to take his own life. And as a consequence, he ended up in those spheres of hell. And he ended up here in the sphere of Venus, the realm of the gluttonous, because he showed in no way possible degree of gratitude for what he had or satisfaction for the things that he was getting. As they continued, Dante and Virgil came across Sappho of the island of Lesbos. And of Sappho, who is one known who praised and sang chants of the infatuations of all of the degenerated people. Even though this is what she chanted about, Sappho is known as a Greek poet, but she is considered as one who has not been as the one who has been the most widely adored and the most influential woman in the world of literature from the days of the Greek until modern times. There are some writings still available from Sappho's, but of the 9 books of poems that are attributed to her by tradition and that are celebrated in the ancient world, of those little fractions and fragments that remain, there are a few hundred lines that include just one complete poem, and it is known as the Hymn to Aphrodite. And in one of the fragments, listed by some scholars as fragment 47, she declares herself by saying, "Eros shook my mind like a mountain wind falling on oak trees." And this, at this level of study, gives us an immediate insight to the things that Sappho of Lesbos wrote about. Because we know that Eros is a symbol of our sexual libido. It is a symbol of the force of our creative power. And it says Eros, sexual libido, shook my mind, affected her realm of the mind, meaning it affected her through the untransformed impressions, like a mountain wind falling on oak trees. As the mountain wind falls on oak trees, when all of that fruit is ripe and the wind flows, it shakes and rattles the tree and everything falls out of it. So what she is speaking about here are all of those sexual infatuations of the degenerated people. And in this particular case, she speaks about herself. So here we see a degree of gluttony. Here we see excessive indulgence in those things that have also to do with a sexual nature, with the use of our creative power. And that does not just mean the sexual satisfaction. It also has to do with all of our emotional addictions. It also has to do with all of our chemical dependencies. And it also has to do with all of our psychological dependencies, whether it is money or possessions, or whether it is food, or whether it is attention, or whether it is emotions, etc., etc. As they continued, they also came across the shade of Heliogabalus. And Heliogabalus, at around the time when he was 14 years of age, he ended up becoming an emperor. And he initiated a reign that is remembered mainly for sexual scandals and religious controversy. So here we see another aspect of our own selves, where we fail to express gratitude for those opportunities that we receive for higher responsibilities, and we express no satisfaction for that extra power that we get. And in many cases, we end up abusing of our power. And no better example of this than those of us who are parents. We are given this beautiful opportunity to be emperors of our own homes. And before long, we end up becoming despots. We end up becoming tyrants abusing of our position at home, trying to coerce others, particularly our children, forcing them to do things as we move them by fear, by threats. So you see, rather than showing gratitude for that opportunity to educate that soul, of showing satisfaction for the challenges that we find in the home so that we can observe them and self-discover ourselves and work eliminating our defects, we only show satisfaction for the things that we like. And for the ones that we don't like, then we rebel. But nevertheless, Dante and Virgil continue their path. And here in this particular sphere of Venus, moving from that sphere of Mercury, what we see is that the number of laws that are governing those catabolic forces of nature is multiplied once again. And this is a realm that is governed by 284 laws. This is a realm that is very, very mechanical. Oh, perhaps that is an incorrect on our part. This is a realm that is governed by 288 laws. Substantial more laws than what we have here in this plane of substance, so we have only 48. And the mechanicity here takes care of destroying those particular psychological aggregates. So Dante and Virgil, they continue with their course along the way, and they continue talking. But as they get there, they come across Cerberus. Cerberus is the three-headed monster that stands over those who are sunken deep in the slush. And Cerberus barks furiously and claws and bites all of those shades that are within reach, keeping them terrified so that they cannot escape that particular third sphere of hell. And in the meantime, the spirits howl in the rain of slush that is raining on them, and they attempt to evade the monster. And seeing the two travelers, Cerberus turns on them and is silenced only when Virgil bends and he grabs from that muck in the ground and he throws handfuls of that reeking dirt and that slime into the mouths of the monster. That keeps Cerberus calm, and that allows Dante and Virgil just to continue their path. So then they continue walking towards the fourth circle. And as they get there, this fourth circle then becomes the circle or the sphere of the sun in the realm of hell. They leave behind the realm of the gluttonous and they walk into the space of the hoarders and the spendthrifters. These are the hoarders and the wasters, the ones who keep too much and the ones who throw everything away. And this brings us back into the Our Father prayer, to that particular petition that says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Because in this particular petition, what we see is harmony and we see balance. Here in the sphere of the sun, when we contemplate the 9 heavens above, what we see is the spiritual soul of our being. Here we see the realm of Buddhi, the illuminated soul. And it is this beautiful princess, the one princess that our innermost, as the courageous prince in every fairy tale, goes out into the dark forest to rescue. It is in this particular sphere of the sun that we are seeing the effect of the lack of balance in creation. When we are speaking, of course, in this realm of hell. Because the sun, as the center of our solar system, keeps all of its planets in perfect harmony. The sun emanates from itself a particular radiation that is of a Christic nature. The planets receive that radiation and they nourish themselves from it. And in turn, the planets emit a radiation that is once again received by the sun, and the sun feeds itself from the planets. But this interaction is not just between the planets and the sun. Every planet has an electromagnetic field and emits radiations. So all the other planets also receive of those forces from the other planets and nourish themselves. And as they release, the planets nourish from each other. But this dynamic extends beyond that, because solar systems emanate those forces and they nourish each other as well. And then the constellations holding all of those solar systems will nourish amongst themselves, and thus the galaxies nourish each other. You see all this balance? This is the eternal common cosmic law of the cosmic common trogo autoegocrat. This is the law that in very simple terms state, you eat and you are eaten. This is why we see that as the grass grows, there are some creatures that feed themselves from the grass, and other creatures that feed themselves from those. And as those larger creatures die and their carcasses decompose, they become nourishment for the grass once again. This is the cosmic common law that closes that cycle of nourishment that we see all over creation. And when we create an imbalance in the cosmic law of the trogo autoegocrat, then we see those souls that create that imbalance descending into the spheres of hell, specifically into the sphere of the sun. So if you are a hoarder, you are keeping that condensed energy to yourself and you are disrupting the cycle. And if you are a spendthrifter, you are disposing so much of that energy that you're depriving others from an opportunity to have it. So if you hoard, you create an imbalance. And if you are a waster, you create an imbalance as well. And this is what Dante and Virgil came to see here. Hoarders and spendthrifters, they are moved by greed. And greed is a very voracious appetite. It is the voracious appetite to grab and hold and not give. And it is voracious appetite to just waste regardless of everyone else around. So you can see that there is a similarity here in this fourth sphere and in the third sphere as well. In one, we see the gluttons. They show no gratefulness. They show no satisfaction. And here we see the condition even worse, where there's just the manifestation of that voracious appetite of keeping or wasting. And friends, when we look around the world, we can see what is the effect of this cosmic law in us today. The fact that we have created such an imbalance. Everywhere around us, we see so many people who are doing everything that they can to be able to make it to the next day. It is because of this inhumane condition that we're experiencing here. There are so many families who suffer from meal insecurity, and they have no idea from where their children are going to be having their next meal. Hoarders and spendthrifters are the ones who go into this particular sphere of hell. But look about the expanded effect of us throwing off balance the cosmic law of the trogo autoegocrat. Because when it comes to us as an organic layer in the outermost part of this organism known as the planet, we have come to exploit the resources of the planet to the degree that we have created, in many cases, irreparable damage. And we have created effects that extend beyond the quality of the waters, beyond the quality of the air that we breathe, beyond the lands that could be feeding us, so that we have damaged them to a degree that they have become infertile grounds, to the point where we are seeing illnesses that our body is unable to handle, the emergence of illnesses and pathogens that cannot be controlled with the chemistries that we have today. And yet we continue going even further, creating more damage and resulting in water that we cannot consume anymore, altering the foodstuff that we to a point in which we impair the ability of the plant kingdom to transform those cosmic forces and deliver them to the planet so that the planet can nourish itself. So the damage that we have created is to such a degree that we are now affecting the way that the planet can then receive the impression of those external cosmic forces to nourish itself, and then process that and return those cosmic energies back so that other planets can nourish themselves as well. The effect that we have created because of our greed is not only limited to the human race. It affects the planet as an organism, again, because in this imbalance, the planet cannot now nourish itself the same way that the way that it should. And as those cosmic energies are then returned into the cosmos, they are returned in a way that is deficient, affecting the neighboring planets and affecting the nourishment of our sun. So understanding this, Dante and Virgil then enter this sphere of the sun. And as they enter the fourth circle, they are stopped by the raging Plutus. And Plutus here, he happens to be a mythological god of wealth and riches. And this mythological god of wealth and riches, he stands at the entrance of this fourth circle because he is the one who guards all of these shades of hoarders and wasters so that they cannot escape this particular fourth sphere of hell. Now Plutus, he is raging and he is saying things that people just cannot understand. And because his words are untranslatable, some people believe that they are kind of an incantation to Satan to bring more damnation into all of those souls that are there. But as this happens, Pluto is once again chastised. You remember that Charon was chastised when he did not want to let Dante get into that little canoe boat to cross the Charon River. So here, Plutus is chastised, and as he has been chastised, he has been chastised in the same way as all of the monsters in the previous circles. So at that moment, he collapses and he falls onto the ground. And the two poets take advantage of that to walk into the circle. Dante, he takes a glimpse of this fourth circle, and he sees here that there are here the wasters and the hoarders. And they are all suffering the same punishment. They find themselves rolling these enormous weights at one another. The wasters are pushing these weights against the hoarders, and they're saying, "Why do you hoard?" And the hoarders are shouting back at them, "Why do you waste?" And as they clash, those souls hurry into the weights once again, just to consistently and continually repeat the same action over and over again, all the meanwhile while screaming at each other. And this is how these shades, how these souls are drained of their energies. They are drained of their greed in this particular sphere of hell. Now this is certainly very painful and very difficult for all of these shades, because the realm of the sun in this particular sphere of hell is of 384 laws. So the number of laws has substantially increased, and as that happens, the catabolic forces of nature, the force that they have to exert to be able to move those weights, and the energy that they dissipate with each one of their screams, slowly disintegrates them. Dante and Virgil, as they observe this, Dante looks at Virgil, and Virgil then reminds him that time has passed, that it has moved by pretty quickly, and that they have to descend into the next circle. So they cross to the other bank, and they find that there is a fountain of a strange, dark water, and that this dark water is flowing in a stream down through a crack in a rock. They decide to follow the stream, and following the stream to the foot of the rocks, they come into a marsh that is called the Styx. And as they get there, we will leave it here, and then we will continue with our story next week. So dear friends, this has been the spheres of Dante, specifically the sphere of Venus and the sphere of the sun. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.